All right, so let's go back to what we were talking about the Depression. You know, your father meeting your mother up in Pennsylvania, and you know, your father being a resident of Alexandria, and then actually relocated.
Yes. Well, my father, my grandparents lived at 725 South Fairfax Street. And they paid $790 for that house in 1882, and I know that because I have the deed. But because my father's mother died while he was yet a very small child, he was reared by some neighbors. Her name was Sarah, not Sarah Day, but Mrs. White. And as a young man, the Depression came. My father having been born in 1904, the Depression came, and in the 20s, and folks were scrambling to find something to do to make a living. My grandfather had gone to New Jersey to work in the shipyard, and my father followed him up there and met my mother there. And they came back here when things really got even worse to live with my grandfather and my great-grandmother and down on South Fairfax Street until they could get on their feet. And then they moved into a neighborhood which is now, they now have a sign up there called Lennox Place, but it's actually old Sunnyside. And Montgomery Watson, who was a black attorney and had practiced in Washington, bought a tract of land and and had it surveyed. And I have a copy of it because when I sold my parents' house, I had to find that. And it was a black community there with about 15 or 20 families in it since way back. And my parents lived there, and that's where I was raised. And it was from there that I had to go to Alexandria, all the way to Alexandria to go to school. I had to pass Mount Vernon School, which was on Mount Vernon Avenue. And then by then I had to pass George Washington High School, and in order to get to all the way to Alexandria to go to school because of segregation. Yeah.
So you were actually passing all these schools to get to your school?
Oh, absolutely, and sometimes with great difficulty.
What type of difficulty?
I can recall there was a store on West Glebe Road, and the man who owned it had some sons who could drive. And here these little black kids had to walk along Glebe Road and all the way from Elbert Avenue out to Mount Vernon Avenue and Hume. There's a bank there now to catch the bus. Had to walk that far to catch the bus. By the way, that was not a school bus. That was a public bus, which you had to pay for. And these guys would come along and run us over in the ditch to get out of the way. And they were the Cooper brothers. And, of course, my father took care of that once he learned of it with some danger to himself to go confront. In those days, it was not so easy to go confront people about things pertaining to just you, black people.
So, I mean, in the heart of racism, heart of segregation, your dad took it upon himself to make amends in what was going on.
Well, I guess I'm from kind of an aggressive people. If you look into the records of the city of Alexandria, you will find, in fact, it's in the Resources Center there on North Alfred Street. My grandfather led the fight to get Lyles Crouch School because there was no place. The Parker Gray was crowded, and kids from south of Alexandria had to walk all the way up there to go to school, and he was in the fight for that, and was a little bit on the radical side all his life. So my father didn't find it very difficult standing up for himself, and never has. And I don't think he left any of his children with any difficulty doing that either.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, all right, your dad was a minister.
Yeah, but in those days, a minister couldn't make a living just being a minister. So they all had to do something. When my father came back from New Jersey, he and my grandfather started first a bus company. It was the first black bus company in Alexandria. And it used to run from downtown Alexandria out to what we know as Commonwealth Avenue. And the bridge across to Washington was on Commonwealth Avenue in those days. And it then went over and crossed into Washington. And that bus ran about 3 loads in the morning and about 3 in the afternoon for black people to get from Alexandria to Washington to work, because that was where the most of the work was.
So, but the clientele was all black?
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. In the 30s, in fact in the 40s, a black person in Alexandria was considered a professional if he was a clerk in the federal government, because that's pretty much all they could be, was clerks and wage board workers, laborers or things of that nature, because they weren't allowed to be what we would now call a GS6 or 7 or anything that high. There were very few. And so in order to have what we call upscale jobs, they had to go to Washington to do it. Otherwise, they were in Alexandria, they were just domestics for the most part, or laborers. Yes. And for that reason, my parents were very adamant about their children. I remember one day crossing the bridge there at where the bridge crosses Potomac Yards on US 1, Jeff Davis Highway. And there were some men out there stripped to their waists in the morning, like 8 o'clock, and it's like 85 degrees. And these guys had the jackhammer breaking concrete. And my father said, "Son, look at that. That's why you're going to college." And I've never forgotten what he said. He's saying that. Now, but he and my grandfather, in order to get me through college and my 3 brothers and my sister, they had a decorating firm that they started soon after he came back here. And when each one of the boys hit age 12, we went to work in that business. And I never had to worry about a Christmas job or a summer job. Never had to worry about that, because the day we got out of school, we went to work and worked every day but Christmas Day or Thanksgiving Day, and didn't work on Sunday, but we worked all those other days. So much so that by the time each of us went off to college, we could have made a living as decorators. And if you go into any of our homes, you can see that our wives complain that we won't hire anybody to do the work, because they can't do it as well as we think we can do.
Right.
Yes.
Prior to World War II, you never had a key, and you used to keep your doors open.
I don't recall having a key to my house where I grew up as a kid. I guess until I came home from college. I don't think we ever locked the house.
Was that because of the close-knit neighborhood, or?
Well, that and we trusted each other. The neighbors trusted each other. We never had any difficulty. Being a minister, People leaned on my father for advice and help and things of that nature. I can recall, talking about the Depression, I can recall my father. We would be at home, very often it happened on Saturday. He would pull up in the yard with a white family. And he would bring them in the house, and they were obviously tattered from the road. And he would say, Evelyn, my mother, I just picked these people up over on Jefferson Davis Highway. They were thumbing a ride, trying to get to someplace. And would you fix them something to eat? And we would feed them and put them back on the road. I've seen him do that. I saw him do that probably a dozen times as a youngster. So there was quite an impact of the Depression on the nature of my life and my family's.
Why would you say that? What type of impact?
Well, you didn't waste anything. I was not offended by hand-me-downs because that's pretty much what I had. Because I had two older brothers, and whatever they wore, and it wasn't total rags I got.
Right.
You know, it might be dawn, but I would get it. Of course, there are almost 11 years between me. I'm the fourth of five, and then there's almost 11 years before my baby brother. So I had no choice but to expect to have hand-me-downs and to see the greatest kind of care in preserving what's left over from the table. You hear people talk about being a Depression baby, a clean plater. Even today, I will not leave food on my plate. And I am agitated when I see others do it because of the way I was trained as a kid, you know. I don't know how I ever helped them, but we used to hear the kids starving, children starving in China and India and all sorts of places, you know, and you're going to throw that food away?
Right.
Yeah.
So, talk about the education that you received in Alexandria. I mean, you went to Parker Gray, and you know, it was a Negro school built for Negro kids, school kids. Talk a little bit about that.
I am not bitter at all about it. I have grown past any of that.
Were you ever bitter?
Oh, I suspect as a child I was probably the word may not be, bitter may not be the proper word.
Okay.
I guess the proper word would be consumed by it. I was never consumed by it, and the reason I wasn't consumed by it was I always was told all my life, every time you stop to throw a rock at a barking dog, you're losing time on your journey. I was told that all of my life. You know, don't stop to throw rocks. But if the term separate but equal needs an example of what it is not, what we went to would be a perfect example of what is not very equal.
Describe a little bit of that.
Well, the books we had in school were the used books from the white school. They many of them had the backs torn off, pages missing, all sorts of graffiti and racial epithets and stuff written all in them, and things of that nature. And that was what we had for school books, pretty much all the way through. I would say maybe in about 1947 or 48, we started seeing a few new books because people began to get serious about the threat of progressive integration, so they had to work a little bit harder toward being equal. Still wasn't very equal. But one thing we had that I really think is missing now, we had teachers who were also mothers and fathers. They were, for many children who didn't have a full family as I did, they were the family. They were the matriarchs and the patriarchs. I remember in elementary school, the teachers would buy soap and towels and things and bring them to school for kids who came to school without their faces washed. They would spend their money to buy them. There wasn't any lunch programs, or there wasn't anything to for the teacher to have to subsidize their support of those kids, but they did it, and they loved them. And when we got to high school, those same people, Earl Patterson, Edith Anderson, Andrew Adkins, Reverend Andrew Adkins, I can go on and just name them one after the other. Ferris Holland, Mr. Holland, who was my homeroom teacher and chemistry teacher, and more. Edith Hughes. Those people put themselves into the young people. They would stop a kid and take time to explain to them the need to be on time, the need to, if you can't be rich, you can at least be clean. And then they worked with kids about their personal discipline, things of that nature. And so we got something that kids are not really getting very much of today, mainly because teachers are afraid to bother children about their personal business. So that replaced what we lacked in fine facilities, great books, things of that nature. The library was ridiculous. We had no library, and that's why they built the old Robinson Library, which is now the Resource Center, and put a handful of books in it and said, now you have a library. Because Attorney Tucker and some others went down and demanded entrance into the library on Queen Street. Yeah, so but we survived that system with very small classes. A class might have 20, 25 in it. My high school, my graduating class, which was, in those days, you'd graduate some folk in February and some in June.
So they split it up.
Well, yes, because kids started on a half semester by age in those days. Not everybody started in September by age, or you had to wait till the next September. You could do it every 6 months, or the second semester. And so with two classes together, we only had 38 in my graduating class.
Were you part of the 12th grade or the 11th grade when you graduated?
No, we didn't have any such, didn't have a 12th grade in those days.
So that never dawned on you, like, hey, we don't even have a 12th grade, or it didn't matter, or that was just the way the system
didn't
was?
bother me. Many kids, in fact, some kids on my street, whose parents thought they needed a better preparation, would send them to Washington, to Cardozo or Armstrong or Dunbar, primarily, and have some Washington address, and they would attend high school in Washington. Well, my parents didn't do that. They said they thought as Booker T. Washington thought, drop your bucket where you are, so you're going to do well out here. Now, as a person in high school, I was under a lot of pressure.
Why?
I had two brothers and a sister older than me, older than I was. And all of them were excellent students. In fact, they were all more than excellent students. And so there was always heat on me as I would come along. A teacher would say, no, not a Brooks doing that. A Brooks not having his homework. A Brooks, so I was always under a lot of pressure. Mm-hmm. But thank God I had it, or I might not have survived.
So where'd you find the affection for music?
My grandfather was a vaudevillian also. Played on the road.
Now that's a term from way back.
Yeah, and his brother was also a musician. And my grandfather had a trombone and a baritone horn. And as each of the boys got old enough, he started them on one or the other of the horns. I only got a few lessons, but by just watching my brothers, and they would leave to go out, I would pick up the horn and play it. And my sister was given the piano by the late John Henry Jackson, who was probably the most fulfilling music teacher in the old days in Alexandria. He was also the organist at Alfred Street Baptist Church. But I then played it in high school. And when it came time to go to college, at that time, my oldest brother was working on a master's degree in chemistry at Tuskegee. My next brother was a seminarian at Andover Theological Seminary in Boston. My sister was turning to be a junior at Virginia Union. Now I'm getting ready to go, and my parents are going to have 4 kids in college. So I had to have some kind of help. Even though I worked, and all of us worked, we would all work, take no salary, and my father would manage to get everybody in school in September, and that'd be enough to pay the December thing. And then somewhere in the winter, he'd run out of money, and he'd borrow it. And then when summertime came, we would all go back in working too with him and my grandfather, and we'd raise enough to pay off that and get back into school for the next year. So I had to have a way to assist myself. I wanted to go to Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. It's really where I wanted to go. Under a scholarship, it was a scholarship program called Ness Finesse, and it stood for, I don't recall, but it was something about financial assistance for Negro students.
Mm-hmm.
And they were going to give me a scholarship, and after the scholarship, it would still cost my family about $5,000 a year for me to go. Well, $5,000 in 1950 would be like $75,000 today or more. Or I could go to Virginia State University, it was then Virginia State College, be an education major, and I was going to be an instrumental music major if I did that, and I could go for $590 with a $300 scholarship, a year scholarship. So you know what he took. And it was wonderful because it was there that God led me to so many other things that have made my life as rich as it is.
So would you say that Parker Gray and the teachers and your home life and the preparation that you had there helped you along your way as you were at V State?
Oh, definitely. In high school, and I don't want to sound as though I'm bragging, but in high school I was the president of my class for 3 years. My senior year I wasn't because I was president of student government. I have always struggled for a piece of recognition because I had these older sisters and brothers. So it was a natural aggression that came to me. But the opportunities I got at Parker Gray to express myself, I was in the Elksar Taco contest and many other things of that nature, gave me a footing that to many people I find hard to explain. And it's hard because you are what you have been, and it's very hard to break that. In other words, the experiences that you bring to the table are what lead you to where you go, for the most part. And so having had all that opportunity, when I went off to college, I wasn't afraid of anybody. I wasn't afraid to stand up and speak. You know, I wasn't at all afraid of taking responsibility. And so Parker Gray did a significant job in developing me that way. Might it have happened had I gone to Dunbar? It might have. It might have, but I doubt that it would have been as it was, because it was so small. And if you wanted an opportunity, you didn't have any trouble getting it. You know, to do leadership or hardly anything else you wanted to do.
All during the heart of segregation.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I think
and oppression.
Well, see, if there's a difference in what I was taught and what many people are taught, what many young black kids were taught, I was not taught to hate. I was not taught to fight them. I was taught fight to build yourself. Even with the limitations that were upon us in those days, in my house we always heard, can he do that? Then you can do it. Can she do that? Then you can do it. Whatever it was.
Right.
And so we spent our time working to build build the preparation for whatever came before you. I did an interview once for a public radio, and the woman asked me, "What did you do to get to be what you are now?" And I said, "I didn't do anything other than what I was supposed to be doing at the time I was doing it. You know, I didn't make any. I had no idea that I would end up in the Army. I didn't go off to college to do that. In fact, when I got to college and was offered a regular Army commission as a senior, I refused it because I wanted to be a school teacher."
Were you in ROTC?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
so
yes.
Then you got your degree and the commission.
That's right. But I had to do the 2 years, and I'm jumping around. But when I went into, or rather, before I left school, when you go to ROTC summer camp, they designate 1 or 2 or 3 students as what they call distinguished military graduates. And I was a distinguished military graduate. Well, distinguished military graduates are offered a commission in the regular Army, meaning you're going to be a careerist. I didn't want that because I didn't have a good idea of what an officer's life was. So after I got in, I thank God that he crossed my path. There was a white officer who was my company commander when I was a lieutenant. He was a captain, who made me to be his son as a mentor. And he taught me all of the ropes. He said, what games can you, what do you play? I said, I can play a little basketball, little softball, things of that nature. He said, decisions are not made on the basketball court. They're not made on the football field. Decisions are made on the tennis court. Decisions are made on the golf course. Decisions are made at the bridge table. Now you need to go learn these things. And he made arrangements to make sure that I learned every one of them.
Why do you think decisions are made in those areas and not on the basketball court and not on the softball field and not on the football field?
Today...
no, back then.
Well, I'm going back there.
Okay.
But today, that isn't totally so. But in those days, that was so. And it was so because that's where professional people were. That's where people of substance were. That's where people who were leaders were. They were on the golf course. And when a person sees you in that informal setting and discovers that you are really their social equal, whether their eyes keep trying to tell them that you're not, in their heart they're discovering that you're really their social equal. You can play tennis. You can play golf. You know how to play bridge. You know some of these finer things. And so that's where you make the personal relationships, which were denied for years and years, and in some instances even still today, because we were not in that social set. And so you needed to be in the social set. And that was where he did that for me, and it helped me significantly.
So you wanted to be a teacher.
Yes.
Got commissioned.
Yes.
And then went into the service.
Yes.
But what made you want to be a teacher? What was it? Was it another? Was it nurturing from your teachers at Parker Gray? Was it?
It was Arthur Bracey. Mr. Bracey was my shop teacher. It was Ferris Holland. Mr. Holland was my homeroom teacher and chemistry teacher. It was Earl Patterson, who was the band director and music teacher. And the fact that I had two cousins from the upper generation on my father's side who were teachers. In those days, a black person who went to college, in 1950, a black person who went to college went for one of these reasons primarily: to be a teacher, and that was what probably 85% of them went for. They could then go to medical school. They could go to Howard University or down to Meharry, down in Nashville. Mm-hmm. Or they could go to law school, and there were just a couple of law schools that they could go to in the South. And a few of them would go up to Pennsylvania and go to Eccles and become funeral directors. That was it. There were no TV executives. There were no business people of any sort. No management consultants. I asked one of my granddaughters, "What are you majoring in college?" She says, "I'm majoring in sports science." And I wanted to know what that was. I hadn't even heard of it.
Right.
Well, that's a field. But the things that they're majoring in today, none of that existed in my day. There weren't any computer technicians. And the other place, by the way, that they went was to the post office to be a simple, start-off postman. They didn't go into management. They went to be a postman. And that was the extent of our professional life in 1950. But as time has gone, thank God, that's changed.
No doubt.
Yeah.
So you went into the service, mm-hmm. and you started out in infantry
as a second lieutenant.
Second lieutenant. And
then I came back to. I was a second lieutenant in Alaska. But my first assignment was at Fort Lee, Virginia, and that's where I met this man, Captain James G. Monteith, whom I will be indebted to for the rest of my life, because he's the one who set me straight about preparation, about how to prepare yourself for examinations and all the other tough things that officers have to go through. But then I went to Alaska and was an infantry lieutenant in 23rd Infantry Regiment out there in that snow and 20 and 30 below zero, and loved it. And that's where my two sons were born while we were there in Alaska. And I came back from Alaska and went back into logistics work. I was a quartermaster. And I went to Central State University to be assistant professor of military science. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Let me ask you this: when you were in Alaska, so that's when, and when you were under the tutelage of the officer who actually took you under his wing, you started thinking more, hey, I could make a career out of this, or I still want to be a
no,
teacher?
Captain Monteith
Captain Monteith?
He managed that. He's the one who started pumping that into me soon as he met me. He kept saying, "You've got what it takes. You've got what it takes. You ought to do that."
What did he see in you? What do you think? I mean, why do you think that he...
You want me to be self-serving, huh?
No. He did a whole lot of other officers.
I had a lot of confidence. I admit, I was a bit daring. I didn't take a lot. There's a story even told even today by a few people who are still alive and remember it. One day I was going out the front gate in my car, and when an officer's car goes by, and officers have a special tag, the military policeman at the gate waves you through, salutes, and you pass on through. Well, I noticed this certain policeman, military policeman, as I would come to the gate, he would do like this and then look away. And he did that 2 or 3 times. And then I happened to be talking to another officer who said, "You know, that's happened to me." I was determined to handle that.
Another black officer?
Yes.
Okay.
I was determined to do something about that. So the next time I went to the gate at 5 o'clock, now in those days, almost everybody had to go through the gate, that same gate, the main gate at Fort Lee. When he did that, I pulled up the brake, turned the car off, got out, and began to not abusively, but to explain to him, "Now, you saluted that car in front of me, but you didn't salute me. Now and then I began to show him, gave him the manual of the salute and how to extend his fingers and whatnot, which was very humiliating to him. In the meantime, the traffic is backed up 3 or 4 blocks. And I took my time and I did that, and I said, "And you are to salute me just like you are every white officer." I did that. Well, the next morning when I came to work, this same Captain Monteith said, "What did you do last night?" I said, "What do you mean what I do?" "You held traffic up, and I've got all sorts of people trying to get a report out of me as to what happened and what I'm going to do about it." And I told him, and he said, "Good job." That was a daring stunt, but
it was right, and you felt in your heart that it was right.
Yeah, I remember. He saw that I was. I was not a person who had learned to hold my head down. You know, I'd look you in the face when I talked to you. He also knew that if I said something, it was exactly what I thought was right. In other words, I was not a yes man, nor did he ever catch me in a lie about what I was supposed to have been doing, to have done in advance of something that the unit was doing and whatnot. In fact, I was the first black officer to be assigned to the headquarters company of Fort Lee, which was about a 500-man organization. And those, I say man because in those days the women were not integrated.
What year was this?
This would be 1955.
And still, life was segregation.
Well, things were changing, but most all of the black officers in those days were over in the what we call the field units, the troop units, the 543rd Group and the 3rd General Support Group. I was assigned to the headquarters company, which has all the prima donnas in it, all of the enlisted people who work up in the headquarters. They're technicians. Some of them are law clerks. They're all sorts of things. So that's a pretty special place to be. Mm-hmm. And they made me the executive officer of that. And they assigned 3 white lieutenants to it about 2 months after I came. And Captain Monteith would say, "All right, Brooks, you see that they work for you." Well, we're all second lieutenants. They work for you. And the more he laid on me, the more I enjoyed. And it turned out to be a blessing. And so he will always be dear to my heart. Yeah.
So let's talk about after that. You say that you had your children in Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Talk a little bit about life then.
Life in Alaska was, to many people, very difficult. In the wintertime, well, let's put it this way, in about September, at Anchorage, where I was, it's dark by 4 o'clock. I'm pitch dark. By October, it's dark at 3 o'clock. And in the morning, it isn't daylight until maybe 8. So, which means you've got 6 or 7 hours of any kind of daylight at all. It's 20, 30 degrees below zero outside. So those wives are in that house all the time, which makes it very difficult for them. The men would get out because they'd be out with the unit. But bless her heart, and by the way, I married an Alexandria girl who came off to college the year after me. But the severeness of it gave many people what they called cabin fever. But she survived all of that. We would hire a babysitter so that she could go out for 2 hours during the day and teach. And she taught remedial studies to soldiers who were trying to get their GED and in a program there. And in those days, they paid her $5 an hour. Now, you laugh, but $5 an hour was $25 an hour today.
Yeah, right.
So it wasn't bad, but it gave her a way to continue to exercise herself other than just chasing babies. And then we left there and came back to the States in 1959 to Central State University, which was, as far as I'm concerned, probably one of my 3 most rewarding assignments in all of my military service.
Why was it?
Because I spent time making officers. I let what Mr. Holland and Mr. Patterson and Mr. Pitts and Reverend Adkins and Mrs. Anderson and the rest of them, what they did to me and others, I let it happen, cause me to do it to other students. I took time, and my wife and I would bring some of the young men and their dates down to our house for lunch or tea or whatnot on a Saturday or Sunday so that they could see what an officer's life was. We would, I would chaperone student events, and I would tell, and you end up picking people for the future. You end up making decisions about who's really going to go someplace. And then to be an old man retired and to see General Fred Lay, who was a student of mine, and dozens of other colonels and generals who were students there when I taught them, and to see my predictions come true, what made it worth every moment of my time. And I really enjoyed having made that kind of a contribution back to students.
Like people made in your
Absolutely.
life.
Absolutely.
So it's ironic that you went to school to be a teacher. Well, you went to V State and you wanted to be a teacher.
Yes.
Got into the military.
Yes.
The teaching went away for a minute, and then you came full circle back to teaching, but from a military science aspect.
And you know what they let me do while I was there? The band director of the university let me be in charge of the ROTC band, so I got a chance to go back and be a band director again.
Right.
Yeah. On the over the chapel at Talladega College in Talladega, Alabama, is this saying: what I earned, I spent. What I saved, I lost. What I gave, I have.
And what does that mean to you?
All of the things you do in life where you're giving, you're really getting. And a teacher is one of the greatest opportunities for giving in this world. And so that was my opportunity to give, and I loved every bit of it. As an old man now, I'm getting near the end of it, but I teach adult Sunday school.
Right, at your church.
Because I guess I'm a natural teacher. I mean, I just love the chance to interact with people and try to increase people's appreciation for what little bit of knowledge I have and can help them obtain for themselves. Yeah.
Parker Gray, small school, Negro school. The five kids that came out of your family and a whole lot of other families have gone on to be successful in several different walks of life.
Yes. There's an old saying: it's not the dog in the fight, it's the fight in the dog. And if you listened to Edith Casey when she taught you, if you listened to Edith Anderson and Mrs. Chase with the commercial courses and things of that nature, and those men that I mentioned, didn't have but about maybe 15 teachers in the whole high school. But if you listened and you did your work, yes, in many instances you were still lacking some skills that some others had. But it wasn't so much those skills that made the difference. It was the desire that they put in students, and they pumped you up. You know, you can slay the dragon. And so they did. We had quite a few successful kids out of that school. I wish there were more, but most of it had to do with the training they got at home, added to what the teachers then pounded upon them. I cannot recall ever thinking that finishing high school was the end of school. You know, finishing high school to me was like finishing elementary school. Mm-hmm. It's just the end of that phase. I don't ever recall not expecting to go to college. Now, my family didn't have a lot of money. It had very little. You know, it wasn't about money. It was about attitude and about desire. And that's what was used to motivate me. And then when you'd get to school and Mr. Pitts, the principal, and others would beat upon you, and I don't mean physically beat upon you, right, but just constantly cover you in the desire to be something. You know, you could get out of there and go be something. Yeah.
Now it's 2006, and you're in Alexandria again. What's wrong with the kids now? In the school system and the youth in Alexandria. I mean, do you think that they're lacking that desire and that hunger? Are they lacking the teachers, the nurturing? Are they lacking that family atmosphere? What? Because they're not being oppressed. They have the first-rate education. What is it?
Well, let's start this conversation off with the fact that first, I'm neither a sociologist nor psychologist, nor am I a professional educator anymore. Let's start it off with that. Having said that, the exact same thing that's wrong with the children is what's wrong with the parents. We have so relaxed the standards about everything in our society. We've so relaxed them. And we've become such a litigious society. Everybody sues everybody for everything. A teacher dare not do the kind of things that teachers did to us in those days to encourage us. You know, I don't mean physically abuse. I mean, they just talk to you, about your personal life, about your living, about your sex habits, about all sorts of things. If you did that today, you would have parents ready to take you down to circuit court. That it starts there. As you look at the medium which we are involved in right now, television, sometimes I, just for fun of it, speed punch my remote just to see what's on the various channels at the time, to see how many of them, the essence of what's going on is sex. And you'll find, you do it almost any time, you'll get 25% almost any time. Sometimes you'll get 75%. It's either about the exposed bosom of some lady, or some innuendo from someone, or something having to do with sex. Well, that's the most important thing to the kids, because that's what they see most. If it isn't sex, it's violence. But that's not all children. And I want to make sure that I leave that impression. There are a significant number of young people who are trapped where you say they are. But for every one that's trapped, there are 2, 3, and sometimes 5 who are not, and who are doing what they're supposed to be doing in preparation for life. But they don't make headlines. The ones who make headlines are those who get into difficulty. As with our society, the world would have you to believe today that most young black males are in trouble, or troublemakers. That's not so. You go count the numbers and you'll find it's not so. Many go to church. Many of them have wonderful jobs. Many of them have families. They're doing a marvelous job. But they don't get the news. The ones who get the news are the ones who create the problems. There are 500 and some members of the United States Congress, the House and the Senate. If you ask the average person to name 5, they would name 4 troublemakers and 1 speaker or something of that nature. But the rest of that 500 are doing a job, and that just happens to be the way life is. I do admit that the standards that we knew about how you dress when you go to school, when you go in public, how you control your language, things of that nature, I do admit that in general that's all bad. You will not hear most young people ever use the word sir or ma'am or madam. You won't hear that. They've just been raised differently. They just have. Didn't make a difference whether you were white or black or what you were. You didn't do that in my day. There's nothing that disturbs me more to go into a restaurant and see a man with his hat on eating. That is so offensive to me, you wouldn't believe it. When I was a young man, if I had even wore my hat in the house, I would get it knocked off. And you didn't dare put it on the table. Not because you were afraid, because you just were trained that way. We don't train each other that way today. We are in a get it your own way society. Do whatever you do is all right. We're total Machiavellianists now, totally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How long have you been back in Alexandria?
I came back to Alexandria in 1985, so that makes it 21 years.
Yes, 21 years.
A bit over 21 years.
All right. Talk to me about the difference or contrast or comparison to the community, the Alexandria community that you grew up in your younger years, and the Alexandria community that you're involved in now, that you're living in.
Let's start off with the churches. Most of the churches in my youth were the core non-school centers of the community of Alexandria. Today, they represent a much larger sector because in those days, there were almost the only blacks who didn't live in Alexandria lived in little enclaves like Gum Spring, Spring Bank, Bailey's Crossroad, Lincolnia, just little enclaves. But now, because of transportation availability, the church is an implosion, meaning at 10:30 everybody's going this way toward Alexandria to the churches. You go to Alfred Street or Shiloh or Ebenezer and some of the others, that's what you have. They're not just downtown Alexandrians as they were. And then at 1 o'clock or so, it's an explosion. They're going back because they represent a much larger community. That's the first thing. So then the second thing that I think is different is that nobody, well, not nobody, that's not fair, but many fewer people know each other. If I did anything, yell at somebody across the street, throw an apple or an orange at somebody, or if not just me, anybody else, did anything like that, when you got home, it was already there. Somebody would have already called. Or when they saw your parents knew it. It does take a village, and it was a village in those days. It's no longer a village, I don't think. Because as black people have become more affluent, and they're no longer GS3s at the top, they're now GS14s and 15s and SESs and colonels and generals and all sorts of other things. Owners of businesses and vice presidents and whatnot, technical people. They live wherever they want to live. And so we are not knit. I don't believe that there is much of well, let's go back. When I said we're not well knit, my behavior was a function of all of those other people too. Mm-hmm. They impacted my behavior. You know, a kid today will, if you would speak to him, he would speak back to you in language far more caustic than what you spoke to him in. So you don't have that neighborhood relationship that you had. I knew every kid in the school, and every kid knew me. You know everybody 2 or 3 years ahead of you, and everybody down 2 or 3 years below you. But I don't think you have that anymore, and that's not good. And you don't have the business where Ms. Helen Day who was a personal friend of my father's, would call up and give a report on me at the drop of a hat, or Miss Laura Darcy, or any of the rest of them. You don't have that. You don't have the kind of discipline system that you had in those days, and so it impacted the community in the same way. Now, those who have and are relatively new to the area don't live in Alexandria. When I was a kid, Alexandria had 25,000 people. Now it's got 125,000. That's a big difference.
It is.
Yeah. Where we are in this building right now was what I used to call a lunch packing away from downtown. You almost needed a lunch to go there and to get back home.
Right.
It was a long ways away. Yeah.
So things have spread out more.
Oh yeah. It's got its advantages and it also has its disadvantages. Yeah.
As with all growth.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about these last two subjects, and we'll be done. What is your most proudest or happiest moment in Alexandria, and what is your least happiest moment about your life in Alexandria when you were younger?
It's a very difficult question because I was a happy kid. I'll just tell you. I have no excuse for not having made something of myself because I had the greatest mother and the greatest father anybody could ever have. And to sit at their tutelage gave me some skills that many people don't have. You know, I have said many times, had life been different, my grandfather would have been a powerful man in society's eyes. And so would my father. My father was probably the greatest philosopher that I know of and that I know, and a wise, second only to Solomon. He was a very wise man. And he imparted that, much of that to his children. And as a result of it, my home life as a kid, out there on Elbert Avenue, when we used to swim in 4 Mile Run, when it was beautiful, crystal clear water. I learned to swim in that my youth there in Sunnyside, as it were, was just wonderful. There were some bumps in the road, but I don't really have a time in Alexandria that was as painful as some other times in my life were subsequent to that. You know, you took the difficulties that came to you, and you didn't let them stop you. You didn't dwell on them. Mm-hmm.
So Central State, teaching military science, and talk about how you progressed from there.
Well, after that, I went to Vietnam, and I was an advisor. I lived with the Vietnamese people up in a town called Quy Nhon. And upon my return, I had put a request in to the military personnel people to send me to graduate school. I wanted to get a master's degree in business administration. Well, they wrote me back and said, thanks, but no thanks. You're going to Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. Well, at the time, the nearest school was Lehigh University, which was about 80 miles away. So when I got the orders and got a welcoming letter from the commander, I wouldn't answer it. I waited until I got home, and I went to Washington and said, what is this? I told you I want to go to graduate school. And you put me where I'm 90 miles from the nearest one to go on my own at night. And so my protestation sustained, and I was sent to Baltimore, where I then, at night, got a master's degree from George Washington University here in Washington, D.C., in finance. And then after some schooling in Kansas, they sent me to the Pentagon. And that's really where my military career took off.
How?
Again, I was what we called in the bowels of the Pentagon. There's some 30,000 people in that place, and most of them never see daylight. And I was down in there where you can't see daylight. And a major who was the Congressional Affairs Officer, he's the guy who goes and makes the arrangements for the Army procurement people to go to Congress and deal with budget matters and argue out the various positions before the members sit and hear the testimony from the senior people. He had a heart attack, young man, out jogging. And they had to have somebody, so they said, who do we got? And bingo, Major Brooks was brand new, been in the building about 3 months. Bingo, up he goes. That turned out to be my entree to the senior part of the Army, because I'm now, as a young major, exposed to the Chief of Staff, the Secretary of the Army, members of Congress, and people and whatnot, in a very sensitive position. And apparently I did it well. So much so that the general who was at the time my boss, who was then Major General Henry A. Miley, Jr., became the four-star commander of the Army Logistics, Army Materiel Command. Well, he wasn't going to turn me loose. When I left him, I went back to Vietnam to command a battalion. When I came back, he wanted me right back working for him. So I learned another lesson.
What's that?
That lesson was that a significant part of what people think is they were denied a job for somebody else to get it. A significant portion of it is the person who did the hiring had confidence in yet another, and they want the person in whom they have confidence. Okay? So, and General Miley had confidence in me because I had helped him through some very difficult moments with the Congress, in stiff budget battles and things of that nature, and had developed a reputation on the Hill with staffers and whatnot. So I am now seen by most everybody who is of any significance. So, and apparently when I went to Vietnam to command a battalion, I did that well. So when you do well what you're sent to do wherever in life, you're preparing for the next position.
Like an audition.
You're not working on the next position. you're doing this one well, which the world will pull you to the next position. You don't have to pull yourself. You don't have to hunt. The world will take, if you're doing your work right. And so I was then sent out to California to command the Sacramento Army Depot, which, by the way, at the time in 1974, had the largest mainframe computer in the entire United States government. In those days, this operation was 2 CDC 5600 computers, which took a gymnasium. They built a special building the size of a gymnasium to house the computers and all the peripheral equipment, with rooms around the side for tape libraries and whatnot, an elevated floor, a very expensive proposition. Incidentally, the computer I have on my desk in my home now can do more than those 2 computers could in those days.
Right.
But they sent me there to be the commander of the organization that had that. And it was having some difficulty getting off the ground. Well, God was good enough to allow me, again, to be successful in bringing that thing into full performance. And that does not pass the sight of people who need somebody who can do that. And so, and in those days, a colonel, I was a new colonel then, in those days, you only got 1 shot as a colonel to be a commander. But I got 2. Because the Army then said, well, he's done that, he's successful at that. At that point I had about 6,000 civilian employees, only of which about 40 were military people, but all the rest were civilians. So then they sent me to Texas to command a 9,000-member military organization, the 13th Corps Support Command, which is the support arm of the 3rd Armored Corps, where my contemporaries, by the way, are the division commanders and people of that nature. And the 2 division commanders at the time were George S. Patton the Third and Julius Beckton, Lieutenant General Julius Beckton, who was superintendent of schools over in Washington for a while. They were people that I've been playing in a game with men of that stature. And apparently I was successful at that, and so the Army decided it ought to make me a general. And incidentally, about the same time I became a general, the first one of my sons graduated from West Point. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the next year, the second one did.
Right.
Yeah. And who, by the way, both stayed in the service and both became generals.
Right. How does that make you feel?
I am a man who professes to be very devout, spiritually devout. And every time somebody says to me, aren't you proud? I say, nope, I'm thankful, because it doesn't have to happen. There are others who have spent every bit of the time praying and sweating and working and loving their children that I did. And they've not been that successful. There are others who have been more successful. And so it has to be a power greater than me that caused them to be there. And I'm thankful more than I am proud. But certainly, it does one's heart good to know that your child or your children did not come out to be weight on the society, but they're helping to hold up the world.
I read an article recently, and it said, where are the General Leo Brookses? And what do you think the writer was actually saying when he was asking that?
Where are they?
Yeah.
I don't.
Where's the next, General Leo Brooks?
I don't know.
What do you think
I don't know.
What do you think
it's unfortunate. Saying? We happen to have gotten a little extra publicity out of the fact that one of them was the commandant of West Point, and the other one was the face and and voice of the war in Iraq at one point. But there are many more men and women who are succeeding every bit as well in the services, as well as in society. As we sit here today, I just got an invitation in the mail yesterday where a black man is going to become the commander of 18th Airborne Corps. That's never been before. We've had a Corps commander. We've had a couple Corps commanders. We've had 5th Corps in Germany had one, and I Corps at Fort Lewis, Washington had one, but we've never had one in 18th Airborne Corps. And so that's about to happen in another 2 weeks. There are loads of instances like that. You can say what one wants to say about opportunity in America. I defy any sector of the entire American society to stand up to the example set by the United States Army, and almost to the same degree the other services. The greatest opportunity, they came the earliest, and as a result of it, that's why you now have a base from which to grow generals. We now put a significant number of people through the academies. The ROTC programs have significant numbers of young black adults, black officers, coming out of there, and so they're meeting the task. One of the strange but true things about the Army is, or the services, one of the strange things is that if you work for the fire department, you expect to go fight the fire. If you're in the armed services, you expect to go to war. Now, you may not expect to be there year in and year out, but you expect to go. And I am so proud of the examples these young people are setting in leadership. They do something else for our society. They show people, kids who came from Montana and upstate New York and places where the only black people they've ever seen in their lives were on the television. They give them a chance to see that here's my boss, by the way. They write home and say, is a black lieutenant or captain or colonel, whatnot. And they get to see them doing the same thing, giving the same kind of loving, leading support that a white officer would give. And that's all anybody's expected to do. And we strive as hard as we can to make the services colorblind. They're not, they never will be, but they're closer than anything else that America has to it.
Mm-hmm. I read a statistic, and I won't keep you long. It said that aside from the service academies, that HBCUs are turning out more officers than any other.
Oh, absolutely. Well, HBCUs turn out more than the academies, more blacks.
Right, more blacks.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Exactly.
And they turn out more officers than the academy turns out in general. Universities do.
Right.
But today, more often than not, you will find a young black officer and you'd say, where'd you go to school? Oh, I went to Eastern Illinois State, or I went to someplace in Arkansas or whatnot. And so the others, they're coming out of all sorts of universities now, in significant numbers. Yeah. And so the base is built. And as long as we have a nation and the system that we're now using exists, there'll always be plenty of young men and women to do. By the way, we have several female black generals. In fact, 2 belong right to my church there at Alva Street.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's plenty of them around.